Once upon a time in a grand and powerful kingdom, there lived a wicked and jealous queen. Though she had great wealth and influence, her heart was filled with malice. She had a daughter, a kind and extraordinarily beautiful princess, whose radiance shone like the sun. Princes from distant lands traveled far and wide, eager to win her hand in marriage. However, the queen, who detested the idea of losing control over her daughter, devised a cruel plan. To each suitor who came seeking the princess's hand, she set forth a seemingly impossible task. "Before you marry my daughter, you must complete a challenge I assign you," she declared. When the young princes failed to accomplish these tasks, she cruelly announced, "Now you shall die." Her loyal woodcutter then beheaded the unfortunate suitor. With every failed attempt, the queen laughed, growing more convinced that her daughter would remain unmarried forever. "You shall never marry." She often sneered at her sorrowful daughter, who longed for freedom and love. Far away in a small and humble kingdom lived a young prince named Charles, the only son of a kind but poor king. One day, Charles heard tales of the beautiful princess and her tragic plight. Determined, he announced to his father, "I will journey to her kingdom and win her hand." His father, horrified, cried, "No, my son! The queen is wicked. She will set you an impossible task and have you killed. You are my only son, and I cannot bear to lose you. There are many beautiful women in the world. You need not risk your life for one." But Charles was resolute. He could think of nothing else. His heart ached, and he neither ate nor slept. Seeing his son's despair, the old king relented with a heavy heart. "Go then," he said. "Go to the princess. I pray you succeed where others have failed." Overjoyed, Charles regained his strength. He feasted heartily, prepared for his journey, and set off alone, for his father was too poor to provide him with servants. "I shall find my own allies along the way," Charles thought confidently. On his journey, Charles came across a peculiar sight, a massive mound lying in the middle of the road. As he approached, he realized it was no mountain, but a man, a giant of extraordinary girth, fast asleep on his back. "Who are you?" Charles asked, intrigued. The giant opened his eyes and yawned. "I am Fat Man," he said. "I ate 10 chickens and 100 cakes for breakfast, and now I am hungry again." "Will you serve me?" Charles asked. "Join me and I shall provide food." "Give me food and I will do anything for you." Fat Man agreed eagerly, following Charles. As they continued, they encountered another strange man. He sat with his ear pressed firmly to the ground, listening intently. "What are you doing?" Charles inquired. "I am Big Ear," the man replied. "I can hear the softest whisper from across the sea. Right now, I hear people weeping. The queen has executed another prince." "Will you be my servant, Big Ear?" asked Charles. "Yes," he replied. "I shall serve you." Further along, they saw 2 enormous limbs stretched across the road. "Are those trees?" Fat Man asked. "No," said Big Ear, listening closely. "They are arms, the longest arms in the world." Following the arms, they found a man with a towering body. "I am Long Arms," he said. "I can stretch myself as far as I wish." "Come with us, Long Arms," said Charles. "I may need your strength." Next, they met a man who covered one eye with his hand. "Why do you cover your eye?" Charles asked. "I am Quick Eyes," the man answered. "I can see through walls, mountains, and even oceans. When something is close, I must cover an eye, or the world seems too near." Charles invited him to join, and Quick Eyes agreed. The final companion they met was a man wrapped in thick coats, shivering. "Why do you wear so many layers?" Charles asked. "The sun is warm." "I am Cold Man," he said. "If I remove my coats, the sun will vanish, snow will fall, and the world will freeze." "Then come with me, Cold Man," said Charles. "But please keep your coats on." Upon arrival, Prince Charles presented himself to the queen. "I have come to marry the princess," he declared. The queen smirked. "Very well, but you must complete 3 tasks. Fail, and you will meet the fate of the others." "I possess a beautiful blue jewel," she said. "Yesterday it fell into the river. Retrieve it before sundown." The prince and his companions rushed to the river. "Quick Eyes, find the jewel," said the prince. Quick Eyes peered into the water. "There it is, deep at the bottom." "Fat Man, drink the river dry," the prince commanded. Fat Man opened his mouth wide and drank until the riverbed lay bare. Long Arms retrieved the jewel. Long Arms reached into the dry bed and plucked out the blue gem, handing it to the prince. The queen's face darkened when she saw it. "Clever," she muttered, "but the next challenge will break you." The following morning, Prince Charles approached the queen with steady confidence. She greeted him with a cruel smile, knowing he had barely escaped her first trial. "I see you have returned," she said smoothly, feigning politeness. "Now for your second task." The queen gestured to an enormous dining table in the palace garden, covered with golden platters. Upon them sat 30 roasted chickens, their skin glistening with oil and herbs. The rich aroma filled the air, but the task was impossible for any ordinary man. "By the stroke of noon, you must eat every single one of these chickens," the queen commanded. "Not a bone or scrap shall remain. If you fail, you will face the same fate as the others before you." The prince chuckled softly, bowing with false humility. "May I invite a friend to dine with me, your majesty?" It would be improper to enjoy such a meal alone. The queen barely stifled a laugh. She knew no man could consume such a quantity of food. Allowing him to share his burden would make little difference. "Very well," she agreed, "but only one friend." The prince nodded and turned to summon his ever-faithful fat man. The enormous man lumbered forward, his stomach already rumbling with anticipation. His eyes lit up at the sight of the grand feast before him. Without hesitation, he tore into the chickens with incredible speed, devouring whole birds in mere moments. Bones cracked and disappeared into his mouth, leaving not a trace behind. The queen watched in horror as Fat Man continued to eat. The palace servants stared in disbelief, and whispers rippled through the crowd gathered to witness the trial. By the time the sun reached its peak, the table was bare. Fat Man wiped his greasy hands on his tunic, let out a loud belch, and looked around hungrily. "Is that all?" he asked. The queen's face turned an alarming shade of red. She clenched her fists beneath the folds of her gown. How could this be? No man should have been able to succeed. But there he stood, well-fed and satisfied. Yet she refused to admit defeat. She would devise an even crueler test. As Fat Man stretched lazily, patting his bulging stomach, the queen turned away. She hurried back into the castle, her mind racing with plans. "Tomorrow he will not escape," she muttered under her breath. That evening, the queen invited Prince Charles to a grand feast in his honor. The banquet hall glittered with candlelight, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats and exotic spices. Musicians played soft melodies and servants moved gracefully between tables, refilling goblets with fine wine. The queen, now wearing a carefully crafted mask of warmth and hospitality, raised her glass. "Prince Charles, you have impressed me thus far. Let us drink in celebration of your triumphs. And as a reward, I grant you the honor of spending 2 hours with my daughter after dinner." The prince, unsuspecting of her devious plot, accepted the goblet she offered. The queen's smile widened as he brought the cup to his lips, unaware of the sleeping potion she had secretly slipped into the rich red wine. As he dined with the princess later that night, his eyelids grew heavy. He struggled to remain alert, but an unnatural drowsiness overcame him. The princess, her soft voice filled with concern, called his name. "Stay awake, my prince. You must not sleep." But her words faded as darkness swallowed him whole. When the prince finally awoke, the princess was gone. The room was empty, save for the whispering wind through the open window. Panic gripped his heart. He rushed to the window and called down to Big Ear, who waited below. "Where is she?" he cried. Big Ear pressed his oversized ear to the ground, listening intently. Moments later, he looked up. "I hear her. She is locked inside an enchanted tree across the river." Quick Eyes squinted into the distance. "I see her, but the river is full once more. We cannot reach her." The prince clenched his fists. "Cold Man, now is your time." Cold Man stepped forward, his eyes gleaming. With a dramatic flourish, he tore open his heavy coat. Instantly, a blizzard erupted around them. The once raging river turned to solid ice, shimmering under the moonlight. The companions raced across the frozen expanse, their breath misting in the frigid air. When they reached the other side, Long Arm stretched his enormous limbs and tore open the tree's enchanted bark, revealing the frightened princess within. He lifted her out gently and placed her into the prince's arms. As they made their way back to the palace, the prince and princess climbed through the window just before the queen entered. She stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth opening in silent horror. The prince smiled. We were just discussing trees and rivers. Outwitted at every turn, the queen's fury had turned into something far darker. Pure, seething hatred. The prince had surpassed every impossible trial, humiliated her at every step, and worst of all, he had won the love of the princess. She could not allow him to succeed. She needed something cruel, something no wit, no strength, no magic could counter. And then she found her answer. That night, under the cover of darkness, she summoned her most loyal guards. Take the prince and his wretched companions to the highest chamber of the palace, she commanded, her voice cold as steel. Bolt the doors, seal the windows, and make sure they do not escape. The guards obeyed, leading the prince and his 5 companions up a winding staircase to a vast, luxurious chamber. The walls were adorned with golden tapestries, and a great chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the room. A grand 4-poster bed stood in one corner, draped in velvet, and thick carpets muffled their footsteps. It was a room fit for a king, but it was also a death trap. Once the prince and his companions were locked inside, the queen strode down to the palace's great furnace, deep below the floors of the castle. There, her royal blacksmiths tended to an enormous fire, its flames licking the walls with hungry heat. The queen's lips curled into a sinister smile. Feed it, she ordered. More wood, more oil. Let the flames roar like never before. We shall see if the prince and his servants can cheat death this time. The blacksmiths obeyed without question. Barrel upon barrel of oil was poured into the inferno. Great piles of wood were thrown into the blaze, and soon the fire raged so fiercely that the very walls of the castle trembled. The heat traveled up iron pipes embedded in the walls, seeping into the grand chamber above. At first, the prince and his companions merely felt warmth. The cold stone walls radiated a pleasant heat, and the glow of the chandelier flickered strangely. The prince loosened his collar. Strange, he murmured. It's getting warmer. Moments later, the air in the room thickened. The warmth grew into an oppressive heat, then into unbearable suffocation. The marble floor beneath their feet became hot. The walls started to glisten with moisture, and the furniture, once comfortable, was now smoldering. The prince wiped sweat from his brow, realizing the trap. She's trying to cook us alive, he gasped. We must find a way out, now! His companions struggled against the locked doors and bolted windows, but nothing budged. The heat continued to rise. Fat Man, who had been lounging comfortably, was now shifting uncomfortably. For the first time in my life, he muttered, I am not hungry. Quick Eyes peered through the keyhole, only to see the flames roaring beneath the floorboards. The entire castle is turning into a furnace, he warned. The queen will make sure no one gets out alive. The prince turned to Cold Man. Do you still feel warm? Cold Man, who had been quiet until now, finally smiled. A strange, eerie smile. He removed his thick gloves, stretched his fingers, and exhaled in contentment. Ah, he sighed. This is perfect. I feel warm at last. But the fire did not stop growing. The heat became unbearable. The air shimmered. The flames below roared like a monster hungry for their flesh. The prince knew they only had moments before the chamber became their tomb. Cold Man, the prince urged, his voice hoarse. Take off your coat. Cold Man's smile faded. He hesitated. Are you sure? Take it off. Now. With a single swift motion, Cold Man unfastened his enormous heavy coat and flung it to the ground. The effect was instant. A bone-chilling wind erupted from his body, swirling through the chamber like a blizzard from the deepest mountains. The walls groaned, and the chandelier's flames flickered and died. Within seconds, the heat that had once threatened to burn them alive was replaced by an overwhelming frost. The marble floor, moments ago too hot to stand on, became coated in thick ice. The windows cracked under the sudden shift in temperature. Icicles sprouted from the ceiling, and a layer of frost blanketed every surface. The very air turned white with mist. Below them, the flames in the furnace flickered and dimmed. The fire, mighty as it was, could not stand against the terrible power of Cold Man's freezing presence. The prince and his companions shivered violently. Fat Man, who had never known what it meant to be cold, clutched his arms and whimpered. Quick Eye's sharp vision blurred with frost, and Long Arms rubbed his hands together furiously. I can't feel my fingers, Big Ear muttered, his teeth chattering. But the prince knew they had survived. He wrapped himself in the discarded coat and looked toward the door. She will come soon, he murmured. Meanwhile, the queen paced outside the chamber, rubbing her hands in anticipation. Soon it will be over, she whispered to herself. Soon they will be nothing but ashes. She pressed her ear to the heavy door, expecting to hear their screams, but there was only silence. Frowning, she motioned to the guards. Open the door! With trembling hands, the guards unbolted the door and pushed it open. A blast of icy wind erupted from the room, nearly knocking them over. The queen gasped and staggered back. Inside, the sight that met her eyes sent her into a frenzy of horror. The prince and his companions were seated comfortably by a fire they had built themselves, warming their hands as if nothing had happened. The once scorching chamber was now a frozen wasteland, its golden walls coated in ice. The once glorious chandelier hanging in shattered icicles. The prince turned to her, his eyes filled with amusement. Good evening, Your Majesty, he said, smirking. We found your accommodations a bit warm, so we made some adjustments. The queen's face contorted with rage. Impossible, she screeched. The prince stood. It is over. You have lost. Something inside the queen broke. She let out an inhuman shriek, a sound so filled with hatred and fury that it echoed through the castle halls. Without another word, she turned and fled, her footsteps echoing in the cold chamber. Some say she vanished into the night, never to be seen again. Others say she wandered into the dark forest and was swallowed by her own sorcery. But whatever became of her, one thing was certain. She never returned. With the wicked queen gone, the kingdom finally knew peace. The prince and the princess were married in a grand celebration, their love finally free from the shadows of cruelty and deception. The people rejoiced, for they had a new, just ruler who had conquered not with armies, but with wisdom and heart. As for the loyal companions, Fat Man, Quick Eyes, Big Ear, Long Arms, and Cold Man, they were each honored for their bravery and given a place in the new court. And so, the prince, the princess, and their faithful friends lived out their days in happiness and peace, ruling wisely and kindly. For though the queen had sought to end them, she had only written her own downfall. As the prince and his brave companions triumphed over every challenge, justice was restored, and the kingdom finally knew peace. The wicked queen, blinded by her own schemes, vanished forever, while the prince and princess ruled with wisdom and kindness. But what do you think? If you were in the prince's place, which of his companions' powers do you think helped him the most? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of courage, wit, and perseverance, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more exciting and inspiring stories to you. Also, hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep believing in the power of wisdom and friendship. See you in the next story.